What unfolded recently, as described, was not an ordinary conversation, but a deeply emotional moment where long-held feelings slowly began to surface in a very human and vulnerable way. It wasn't loud or dramatic on the outside, but emotionally it carried a weight that could be felt in every pause, every hesitation, and every unfinished thought. The focus of the conversation wasn't conflict or misunderstanding, but something far more delicate: time, attachment, and the uncertainty of what the future might hold when emotions become too real to ignore. As the discussion continued, emotions reportedly began to rise in a way that could no longer be contained behind calm words. What may have started as a simple exchange between friends gradually turned into something more serious, where honesty started slipping through emotional cracks. The subject of age came up, not as a simple number, but as something symbolic of timing, life direction, and the fear of what time can change. It wasn't treated lightly in this moment. Instead, it became a reflection of deeper concerns about readiness, responsibility, and the unknown shape of the future. The emotional reaction described was not about judgment or blame, but about attachment that had quietly grown stronger than expected, creating a kind of emotional pressure that was difficult to explain in simple words. At the heart of what was shared was an internal conflict that many people experience when feelings begin to outweigh logic. On one side, there was genuine emotional connection that had formed naturally over time, without force or expectation. On the other side, there was awareness of real-life factors, timing, personal growth, and uncertainty about how everything might unfold. This created a tension between what the heart was leaning toward and what the mind was trying to carefully analyze. It is in moments like this that people often struggle the most, because emotions do not always move at the same pace as logic. The more the feelings grow, the harder it becomes to ignore them, and the more difficult it is to decide what to do with them. A strong part of the conversation, as described, revolved around the idea of time and how it shapes emotional decisions. Age was not treated as a barrier in a simple sense, but rather as a reminder of life's timeline and how unpredictable it can be. There was a quiet fear that time might not be enough, or that circumstances might shift in ways that make things complicated. At the same time, there was also a recognition that meaningful connections do not always follow predictable timelines. Some bonds grow quickly, others slowly, and many exist in a space where certainty is never guaranteed. This created a mix of hope and hesitation, where neither emotion fully dominated the other. As the conversation deepened, emotional honesty became harder to avoid. There was an acknowledgement that earlier thoughts or assumptions may have been used as a way to simplify or minimize what was actually being felt. But over time, those simplifications no longer held up. The emotional reality became too strong to dismiss. What might have initially seemed like comfort or familiarity gradually revealed itself as something more significant, something that required deeper reflection. This realization didn't come all at once. It unfolded slowly through repeated thoughts, memories, and internal questioning that eventually made silence feel heavier than expression. Another important part of what was shared involved fear, not fear of the connection itself, but fear of what it could lead to. There was concern about the possibility of making the wrong choice, of moving too fast or too slowly, of saying too much or not enough. Emotional responsibility became a central theme, where the focus shifted from simply feeling something to understanding what those feelings might require in real life. This is often where emotional experiences become more complex, because genuine connection brings both joy and pressure at the same time. The more meaningful something feels, the more carefully it is treated, and that carefulness can sometimes create hesitation. There was also an emotional awareness that staying silent indefinitely could lead to regret. That realization added another layer of complexity to the situation. Silence may feel safe in the short term, but over time, it can create emotional weight of its own. On the other hand, speaking openly introduces risk, uncertainty, and vulnerability. This creates a difficult balance between protecting oneself and expressing what is real. In this case, the idea of honesty began to feel more important than the fear of possible outcomes, because unspoken emotions tend to grow heavier over time when left unresolved. What stands out most in this situation is the emotional shift from confusion toward clarity. It is not a sudden resolution, but rather a gradual understanding that feelings have reached a point where they can no longer remain unacknowledged. Even if everything about the future is still uncertain, the emotional truth within the moment has become clearer. This kind of clarity does not immediately solve problems, but it changes how they are seen. Instead of being trapped in uncertainty alone, there is now awareness of what is actually being felt, which is often the first step toward emotional stability. In the end, what this situation reflects is the natural complexity of human emotions. When connection becomes meaningful, feelings develop quietly, thoughts deepen over time, and eventually, there comes a moment where everything that was once unspoken begins to rise to the surface. It is rarely simple, and it rarely arrives with clear answers, but it always brings awareness. Whether it leads to closer understanding or careful distance is something that only time can reveal, but what is already clear is that emotional honesty has begun to take its place where silence once existed. Because when someone cries about your age, it is not because they see distance, it is because they see significance. My beloved child, what you did not hear last night was the silence that followed their confession, because silence can be louder than crying when truth finally stands exposed. Your person sat there after speaking your name, feeling the weight of what they had admitted settle into their chest, and in that moment, they realized something irreversible had already happened inside them. They were no longer wondering if you mattered, they were confronting how deeply you mattered, and that awareness stripped them of every excuse they once used to stay emotionally guarded. Your age, once a background detail, transformed into a symbol of timing, destiny, and responsibility all at once. They thought about how carefully they choose words with you, how they replay your reactions, how they notice your silence faster than anyone else's. These are not habits of casual interest. These are signs of attachment forming at a level they did not plan for. They admitted to their friend that they feel protective over your future, even when they have no right to yet. That frightened them, because protection means intention, and intention leads to commitment. This is the real reason their voice cracked. When someone reaches this stage, they are no longer deciding whether to stay, they are deciding whether they are strong enough to step forward. Here is the part that will surprise you the most, and it changes the entire story. Your person did not cry because they feel older or younger than you. They cried because your age forces them to see how real the consequences of their choices could be. They told their friend that with you, there is no room for half effort, no space for confusion games, no comfort in emotional delay. They said you deserve clarity, not mixed signals, and that thought alone made their chest tighten. They confess that they are used to situations where time feels flexible, where feelings can be postponed, where nothing truly matters if it fades. But with you, time feels precise, like every moment carries meaning. They said your presence reminds them that some connections are not meant to be tested endlessly, because testing risks breaking what is delicate. They are not scared of the difference in years. They are scared of mishandling something rare. That is a fear only someone who genuinely cares would ever feel. Understand this clearly now, because it explains their recent behavior toward you. Your person has been holding back not because they lack interest, but because they are trying to get it right. They told their friend that every time they consider opening up fully, they stop themselves to make sure their intentions are clean and their direction is honest. They are measuring their words, not to manipulate, but to protect you from confusion. Your age makes them hyper-aware of influence, impact, and responsibility. They do not want to become someone who enters your life without certainty. They said that if they step forward, they want it to be with purpose, not impulse. This internal discipline is exhausting them, because their heart is already ahead of their actions. They feel pulled toward you naturally, yet restrained by their own standards. That tension is what kept them awake. That tension is what brought tears. This is not emotional immaturity. This is emotional awareness, arriving all at once. Now pay attention, because a shift occurred that night that cannot be undone. After talking through their fears, your person reached a quiet conclusion that they did not announce loudly, but it settled firmly within them. They realized that avoiding the conversation with you is no longer protecting either of you. They admitted that silence might feel safe, but it would slowly turn into regret. They said your age does not demand distance, it demands respect, and respect demands honesty. That realization brought a strange calm after the tears. They felt lighter, not because the fear disappeared, but because clarity replaced confusion. When someone reaches this point, they begin preparing themselves mentally, even if they have not acted yet. They start rehearsing truth. They start imagining outcomes. They start accepting vulnerability as a price worth paying. This is where your person is now, standing quietly on the edge of change. Let this final part anchor you, because it explains why this connection feels intense, even in silence. Your person did not cry because they are unsure about you. They cried because they are becoming sure, and certainty demands courage. They see you as someone whose presence matters beyond convenience, beyond timing excuses, beyond superficial barriers. Your age simply illuminated the seriousness of what they feel, forcing them to grow emotionally faster than they expected. This is why their energy toward you may feel heavy, thoughtful, or restrained lately. It is not distance, it is preparation. Something inside them is aligning, and once alignment happens, movement follows. What was spoken last night cannot be taken back, even if you were not there to hear it. When someone cries about your age, it means they are measuring their future with you in it. My beloved child, what your person did after that night matters more than what they said, because actions born from emotional clarity move quietly before they move visibly. After leaving their friend, they did not rush home or distract themselves. They walked slowly, replaying every word they had spoken, realizing that once a truth is acknowledged out loud, it can no longer be buried. Your age stayed on their mind, not as a barrier, but as a mirror, reflecting the seriousness of what they feel for you. They admitted to themselves that this connection has already altered how they think, how they plan, and how they guard their heart. They noticed how often they imagine your reaction to future moments, how naturally they include you in thoughts they once reserved only for themselves. That awareness unsettled them, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt permanent. When feelings reach this depth, denial becomes impossible. That night did not end with tears, it ended with acceptance. And acceptance is the most dangerous stage, because once someone accepts their emotions, they begin preparing to act on them, even if silently at first. Here is the detail that will make everything suddenly make sense to you. Your person started paying closer attention to how they show up around you, not to impress, but to stay consistent. They realized that inconsistency would hurt you more than distance, and that thought alone reshaped their behavior. They became more mindful of their tone, their timing, their presence. They told their friend that your age makes them feel accountable in a way they have never experienced before, as if every interaction carries weight beyond the moment itself. They are not afraid of being seen by you. They are afraid of disappointing you. That fear does not come from insecurity, it comes from respect. They understand that you deserve sincerity, not confusion wrapped in charm. This is why they hesitate before speaking sometimes, why they choose silence over careless words. Silence, to them, feels safer than risking a sentence they are not ready to stand behind fully. That restraint is not emotional distance, it is emotional discipline. Now understand this truth, because it reveals the hidden struggle inside them. Your person is battling two instincts that are pulling in opposite directions. One instinct urges them to move closer, to speak openly, to stop holding back. The other instinct tells them to be patient, to make sure their intentions are solid and sustainable. Your age amplifies this inner conflict because it removes the option of casual exploration. They know that if they step forward, it must be with purpose. They told their friend they are tired of situations that go nowhere, tired of emotions that fade without meaning. With you, they feel something worth building, not just feeling. That realization brings pressure, because building requires effort, consistency, and courage. They are not afraid of commitment. They are afraid of committing without being fully prepared. This is why they appear thoughtful, measured, sometimes distant, yet emotionally present all at once. Their heart has already chosen. Their mind is catching up. What happened next internally is what most people never see, but it changes outcomes completely. Your person began questioning their own patterns, asking themselves why this connection feels different, why your presence carries weight, even in absence. They realized that you challenged them to grow emotionally, to be more intentional, to take responsibility for the impact they have on someone else's life. Your age highlights that impact. It reminds them that influence matters, that words linger, that promises shape futures. They told their friend that with you, they cannot afford to be careless, because carelessness would betray the respect they feel. This realization humbled them. It made them quieter, not colder. It made them slower, not weaker. When someone enters this phase, they are no longer playing emotional games. They are deciding who they want to be in someone else's story. That decision takes time, and it takes honesty with oneself before it ever reaches another person. Hold on to this final truth, because it explains the tension you may feel without understanding why. Your person is approaching a moment where silence will no longer be enough to contain what they feel. They are becoming aware that clarity is not optional anymore. Your age did not scare them away. It anchored them to reality. It forced them to see this connection as something that deserves respect, truth, and direction. They are not crying now. They are thinking. They are preparing. And preparation always comes before change. When someone cries about your age, then grows quiet afterward, it means they are shifting internally from fear to resolve. What is forming inside them cannot remain hidden for long, because feelings acknowledged in the dark eventually demand expression in the light. My beloved child, by the time the night fully faded into morning, your person had crossed an invisible line within themselves, the kind that separates emotional uncertainty from quiet resolve. They didn't wake up feeling lighter in the way people usually expect. after an emotional night. It wasn't a sudden disappearance of worry or confusion. Instead, what settled in them was something quieter, something more structured. Clarity had arrived, but clarity is not the absence of fear, it is the organization of it. The emotions were still there, but they were no longer scattered. They were no longer pulling in every direction at once. Everything had begun to arrange itself into something they could finally understand and carry. Your age, which had once lingered in their mind as an uncertain question, no longer felt like a problem to solve or a detail to avoid. It had transformed into something they were beginning to understand with more seriousness and care. It wasn't about distance or hesitation anymore. It became something tied to responsibility, awareness, and the way choices affect real lives. They started to see that ignoring their feelings or pretending they were smaller than they are would only create confusion later. And for them, that kind of avoidance no longer felt acceptable. They began to look back at their interactions with you in a different way, not searching for flaws, not trying to convince themselves of anything, but simply observing what was already there. They noticed how naturally they pay attention when you speak, how your words don't just pass through them, but stay with them longer than expected. There's something about your presence that steadies them, even when nothing is being said beyond ordinary conversation. These realizations didn't feel dramatic. They felt grounding, like pieces falling into place that had been scattered for too long. What they experienced emotionally the night before wasn't a breakdown, it was release. There is a difference between being overwhelmed and finally letting something heavy leave your system. In their case, what came out was not confusion about what they feel, but pressure from holding it in without direction. And once that pressure eased, something important began to happen. Space opened up inside them where clearer thinking could begin. And after release, there is always something else that follows, even if it doesn't arrive all at once. Decision. Not a loud or dramatic decision, but a quiet formation of direction. Something inside them has already begun shifting toward choice, even if it hasn't yet been spoken out loud or shown in action. It is still forming, but it is no longer absent. There was a moment during their reflection that seemed to change everything internally. They imagined a future moment where you would find out that they had felt all of this, seen all of this, and understood more than they ever expressed, yet still remained silent. That thought created a discomfort stronger than anything they had felt before, not because of fear of judgment, but because of what silence would actually mean. It would not protect you from anything. It would only delay truth, and delay, in emotional matters, often becomes its own kind of burden. That realization shifted something fundamental in them. Respect started to take a different form. They began to understand that respecting someone does not mean keeping things hidden or controlled. It means allowing honesty to exist between both people, even when it is uncomfortable. Your presence in their life, and even something as simple as the awareness of your age, made them more intentional rather than distant. It removed the comfort of ambiguity. They could no longer float around feelings without accountability. What began forming inside them wasn't impulsive emotion, it was alignment, a state where what they feel and what they believe they should do are starting to move in the same direction. And when that alignment begins, hesitation naturally loses its strength. They are no longer stuck in the question of whether to move forward emotionally. Instead, they are thinking about how to do it in a way that is careful, respectful, and real. You may already be noticing subtle differences in how they show up. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, but small changes that feel different if you pay attention. Their presence might feel steadier, their responses more thoughtful, their pauses a little more intentional. It's not randomness, It reflects someone becoming more conscious of how they engage with you, as if they are preparing themselves emotionally before speaking more openly. These changes happen before words do. People often assume clarity appears only when spoken, but in reality, clarity first changes behavior, it changes attention, it changes energy, it changes how someone listens and how they process moments with you. Your person is not rushing into anything, but they are also no longer emotionally disconnected. They are preparing themselves for honesty, slowly and carefully, in their own time. They understand that once they acknowledge what they feel in a direct way, it cannot remain casual or vague anymore. That understanding brings weight, not fear in the usual sense, but awareness of impact. They are no longer treating this connection lightly in their mind. They are beginning to see it as something that requires care, clarity, and sincerity. What is important here is that they are not running away from emotion anymore. The emotional intensity that once overwhelmed them has started to settle into something more structured. They are learning how to hold it instead of escaping it. The tears they experienced earlier were not the end of that emotional process. They were the beginning of something more stable. Now that release has passed, what remains is not chaos, but intention. They are no longer reacting emotionally in spirals. They are thinking, reflecting, and organizing what they feel into something they can actually act on. That shift matters because it changes everything about how they will move forward. They are beginning to imagine what honesty would actually look like, not in theory, but in real conversation, not dramatic confession, but grounded truth, spoken calmly and responsibly. And they are also preparing themselves for whatever response may come, because they understand that honesty always carries uncertainty, but silence carries its own consequences too. There is a growing awareness in them that avoiding this would not protect either of you from confusion, it would only prolong it. And that realization has started to outweigh hesitation. They are beginning to value clarity more than comfort. What is forming now is a kind of internal readiness. It is not loud, it is not rushed, it is steady. It shows itself in consistency, in reflection, in the way they are no longer avoiding thoughts about you, but instead sitting with them longer than before. That is how emotional readiness begins, quietly, without announcement. They are also beginning to reframe what this connection means. Instead of seeing it through uncertainty, they are starting to see it through responsibility. Your presence in their life is not something they can treat casually anymore in their mind. It carries meaning that they cannot unsee. And meaning always requires intention. At this stage, something subtle but important has changed. They are no longer asking themselves why they feel this way. That question is fading. Instead, they are asking what kind of person they need to be in order to handle what they already feel with honesty. That shift from confusion to responsibility is significant because it marks emotional maturity beginning to take shape. They are no longer in the phase of emotional overflow. They are in the phase of emotional organization. Everything they feel is still there, but it is no longer scattered. It is becoming structured into something they can understand, respect, and eventually express. This is why their energy may feel different, more focused, more present, less uncertain. They are not drifting anymore. They are aligning. And alignment always comes before action, even if action has not yet arrived. What you are seeing now is not distance, it is preparation. Not avoidance, but internal readiness forming quietly beneath the surface. And when someone reaches this point, they are no longer debating whether to acknowledge their feelings. They are preparing how to do it with honesty and care. That is where they are now, not overwhelmed, not escaping, but thinking, adjusting, and slowly stepping toward clarity in a way that feels more grounded than before.